All right, we are back. Hope you guys had a nice week off. It's not going to feel different as much because, of the situation, but you guys deserve it. And, I hope that teachers um, have been saying this also, but, I just appreciate so much your guys' adjustment into, you know, this thing that we have to kind of just get through together. And I've got a good feeling about April. I think that we'll get through that and be in a good spot. And, maybe this is a time that it's okay to have some school because we have to have our ways to kind of pass the time. But I'm thankful for the fact that this is part of my life and things that we get to focus on. Maybe now that we have to, uh, be inside a little more, and there are things I know that I've been meaning to take care of that I'm just starting to do that now because I have time. So there are silver linings everywhere. And yeah, I mean, we're going to get through it. Anyway, hope you guys had a good week off for what it's worth. And we have now about 5-ish weeks left of the course. So let's keep on track and let's get through that and get you guys into the summer having a new set of design skills on your belt. And if you recall, last week we started some typography stuff, and today I'm not going to go through that assignment. I think that would get kind of repetitive, but we're going to kind of continue that with a new project, and then move into something that builds off of that as well. So this is a unit where we kind of, we have something that builds off the last thing and so on and so forth. And I think that this, paired with the last unit we did, which was talking a lot about space and designing, keeping that in mind and balance and stuff like that, I think these two will mesh well together when we get towards the end of the semester and start thinking about all these things together. So, we're in Module 6. Please look. You'll see that I have published the Module 6 material. So check that out. And you should get, though, everything you need in this video. So, I guess moving on from that, just to be as quick as we can, I'm trying to remember if there's anything else I need to mention before we move into the actual material. I don't think so. But if I'm missing something, if you have questions just about how the rest of the semester will go, let me know, because I know it's a bit confusing, but we're all in this together, to be cliche. Okay, so I have a Pinterest board set up here with some things that I've collected today that I really enjoy. And, one thing I think you'll notice about these is that the main piece of the artwork, the main visual element, the thing that pops off the page the most in each of these is the treatment of text. You could argue that maybe in this one, the basketball player is the thing that has the most visual emphasis. And by the way, disclaimer, I know Paul George, that's who it is. God, for the longest time before this point, I could not think of who it was. Okay, that's who it is. I'm not an idiot. But in this design, which I've seen in the past, and I think I've highlighted that in past classes, you'll notice, of course, there's things done with the text, and I think something that is a central theme of this module. Learning how to be dynamic with the way you use text. Not just putting it on a line per se, but how are you going to move those different characters around? How will you decide to treat each one? What's the movement that it will all have in the end? And maybe when you have other elements on the page, like other text, colors, and maybe images like this, how will those layer? Because I think that layering does help create some of that movement, some of that action with the typography. Okay? But the main thing I'm trying to get across here is that in these cases, the typography, for the most part, is what actually really kind of brings it all together, or it's the main visual element that you can see. I don't know, maybe this is the best example of what I'm trying to say, but obviously the artwork is performed using typography. And you're not just putting text in a line. Nobody actually ask me to go out there and download them any text files. So it seems like everybody has access to their own computers, own downloads, and so you should now know how many fonts there are out there. And so that means basically just how unlimited our options are. Think of the combinations of color, movements, and treatments, and font faces, and all the possibilities that creates. So that should be exciting in and of itself. You'll also notice in pieces like, I want to highlight this one real quick. So in this case, there's some perspective elements to this, and it's a little challenging to get this to look exactly right because of the way that perspective works in these programs. It's a bit tricky, but if you can get it, you can make some kind of cool visual implications with the way you use text. And so this is a ad from Audi, and so it's playing off those words and making a visual relating to those words with the text. So there's some ways to be clever there too. And you can also be just very straightforward, but still layer things in a way that are visually engaging too. So, these are just a few examples of the different things that I think are pretty neat. And in this case, this is a simple way of, we talk about space and balance a lot. This is a good example of something that I might have shown in that first few weeks, but in this one, you can see that the characters were just moved in a custom direction. I'm going to show you how to do that here in a second. And and so you can see how the layout has been changed and sort of made more dynamic with the way that these characters were moved. So it's just that's a good example of doing a lot with just individual characters, and then all of a sudden that object, when it's been reformed, becomes the central visual element. That's very black and white. It's still good design, but I think that we'll be more excited to use more color in this round. Okay, so I've kind of shown you sort of the path we're going down. How do we create artwork using typography, making that the central visual element of the design, still including information we need around it, which I'll get into at the end, but also just successfully making that the central piece. So before I go into the assignment at the end, I do want to give you guys a couple of quick tutorials. Let's say we want to do something like this, where we have the illusion that the S character, is both in front of and behind the leg. So this is a Photoshop job in my opinion, and this is kind of how I would do that. First we have to find a person, and I found this picture of Benedict Cumberbatch. I'm going to save the image as, give it a second. Hopefully this is a PNG. Sometimes, doesn't quite work that great. I'll just do Benedict. That's a JPEG. I'm not sure if it'll work, but regardless, we'll get it to pop out. So I'll save the image, and then it should be good enough for now. I'll just open up photo. It should be open. I do have this. You'll notice those are my thumbnails that I create for the videos. But I'm going to go to my downloads and open up that image. And there we have it. Now, unfortunately, this is not actually a PNG. It is a JPEG that looks like a PNG in preview, which we all know what that's like. Okay, so first, I'm going to take the layer, of course, and duplicate that. I always like to have a backup in the background. And I've also unlocked that layer as well. So here's the way that is the traditional way. So we'll just kind of do it. Quick selection tool. First, got to select the layer. I'll go to the top layer. And if you can't see this, it's probably either because Magic Wand is selected. Just kind of hold that down and then click Quick Selection Tool. Since this is on a pretty much white background, it'll be pretty easy to take out. It won't be very precise, but you can see as I click around the image and just hold, you see I'm clicking and actually holding that down. It's going to start noticing the natural differences in color and pixel definition. And so I'm trying to get this as close as I can. And if I click in there, it should get most of that. If I want to go back and reselect something, I'll just click the Option key. Might be different if you're on a PC, but it's one of those keys. And you'll see that if I click the Option key, that plus sign inside of the circle turns into a minus sign, and then you can go back and reverse some of those selections that you just made. All right, so this seems to be fine. And what I do now is go to Select Inverse, which inverses your selection. You can see that before that, I'll go back and redo that. Control or Command Z. There's a selection that you'll notice around the outside of the box as well. So right now, it's actually selecting all of the white space. So to invert that selection, just go in the Select Inverse, and now it's just going to be selecting the opposite, so the character. Go down here and click this magical button we all know and love. You won't see any changes yet because this layer is still turned on. So unclick that, and now you have your genuine, I guess, person outside of the background. Not, as well defined as I'd like it to be. Normally I'd go in and clean up some of those edges, but for time's sake, we won't be doing that today. I'm just gonna highlight both layers and merge them together. And now you're left with just the layer with no background. So now, how do I get text to perhaps go in front of a different object on the page in Photoshop, and also behind? So what I would do is go to my text tool, and immediately you'll notice as I draw a text box, it's going to create a new layer, which is normal. And I think for the sake of being able to see this, we'll make it something different. Let's make that color red is fine. Now, this layer as it stands, when you bring in a text layer, is a vector layer. So you can go back and make changes to it by clicking the Type tool again, and then clicking back inside that box. Text and things are vector elements because you can adjust them while they're in that state and delete and retype and so on and so forth. But in order to make, it's just the way that I like to do it. Now, you might go on and search YouTube, and there might be different ways that people like doing this, but this is just kind of my way of doing it. I like to be able to use the eraser tool because it makes, to me, it gives me the ability to make more custom changes and to just be a little more precise with it. So this is now on top, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click the layer, and I'm going to do Rasterize the Type. So now you can't go back and really change that layer. Now I just clicked onto the screen again with the Type tool and just created a new type layer, but since I've rasterized it, I can't make adjustments to it in the same way. I can't go back and retype because now it's a rasterized layer, which is the opposite of vector. So this is now made up of pixels, and what my job now can be is if I keep this layer selected and go to the eraser tool, you'll notice I can now make adjustments to that layer with the eraser tool, because before that you couldn't. So now I'm giving the illusion that this text runs behind and in front of this character. All I've done is erase what was in front of the character to make it look like it's both in front and behind. I can go in here and also, make more adjustments as needed, but that's kind of that's the premise that I like to take. That's the plot that I like to use for this. Rasterizing that text layer, and then erasing what I don't want to make the character or whatever that is behind it come through. So that's what I would do. Save this as a Photoshop file or a PNG, export it as a PNG, whatever you want, as long as the background is gone. And you should be able to achieve that kind of illusion. Of course, I guess what I'll do to finish this out is draw a box just to give it some completion. And that color is nasty, so that's not much better, is it? But regardless, I put it on the back layer. You'll see the imperfections in the selection. I would go clean those up typically, but you know, essentially like this is basically just 3 layers the same way. It's a background color, it's an image that's been popped out of its initial background, and it's the text. So they probably just erased, certain parts of this to let the image behind it show through. So same kind of concept, just my way of doing it. Now, one more tutorial, one quick thing I think is going to be useful for you guys, is I think that Illustrator is the best place to do things with custom text. I'll let this kind of load up. But I think that the more that you work in Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, you'll understand that elements generally work the same and have the same properties, but they have different abilities in certain programs. You'll kind of get the idea of what I'm saying. Because InDesign doesn't have all of this variability when it comes to text, and I'll kind of show you some of the abilities that I can utilize here in Illustrator. So I'm going to create a new document real quick just to show you guys what I'm talking about. And I promise this is the tail end of our video today, and I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. Do the landscape so it kind of covers the screen as much as possible. Perfection. Okay, so you all know that if I draw a text box, and typically in Illustrator it fills with placeholder text, which is fine. If I just click without drawing a box, it's the same thing essentially, but there's no bounding lines to define how far the text can reach. So the properties of text are the same. It's just that the bounding box is there if you draw it, and it's not if you don't. And thinking about text, I'm going to make this a bit bigger for you guys and highlight this and make it a more interesting font. It's fine. In Illustrator, right away, when you start using the type tool and get a word onto the page, I'll just change this to something more applicable. You'll notice that you have the ability to go back and adjust that with the type tool and make changes to the text itself. Or you can also at the same time already make adjustments to its properties. Okay, you'll notice that it will make them in the character window too. So I think that offers some kind of flexibility. You might not know what you want to do with it, and so for example, if I do pull this down, I can still go back and change the content of what was typed. So that gives me some freedom to make custom adjustments without sacrificing the ability to go in and make changes. But let's say you have the word that you know that you want, but you don't want it to kind of sit on the same foundational or horizontal plane, which is something that I mentioned in looking at some of those pieces in the Pinterest board. But here's how you would probably do that the easiest. To make this even more custom, you have to change the text into an object. And to do that, you go to Type and click Create Outlines. You'll notice that the box kind of conforms to the maximum height and width of the entire object now. But you can also see, let's see if I actually click this with my selection tool, and then with the direct selection tool, I'll click that. You'll notice that now all these different points show up. And at this point, no pun intended, or maybe it was, I can make very custom changes, as long as I isolate that point first, and then do something like that. So when you've created the outlines of the text, you're now able to make even more custom changes to specific characters and specific points within those characters. Now, one last thing I'll show you guys is something that is going to be a bit confusing, and it's going to kind of sound like Inception from the way that I describe this, but let's say that I want to change the position of just one of these characters, because right now this is a grouped object, right, by default, because it was kind of just produced that way. If I click, and you'll kind of notice, if I decide to click within this, and then double click one of these characters, this kind of strange looking bar appears up here with layer 1 and group. What I can tell you is that this is helping you isolate certain pieces of this grouped object, because now you can actually click one of these letters or one of these pieces in the group, and you'll find this is true of any illustration, anything that is perhaps any compound drawing or creation that is consisting of a lot of layers and a lot of shapes, and they're all grouped together, it seems like. You can always click and double click within the object, and an Illustrator is going to help you kind of reach deeper into that layer and isolate certain pieces of that layer so that you can make changes to it. So let's say this R, for example, I want to make it, underneath, or just maybe slightly lower than the horizontal line that was there. And perhaps, let's say that I'm good with that R. I'll just kind of double click away from the object, and you'll notice that bar goes away, and you're no longer making adjustments to specific pieces of the layer. Now this object has been redefined, and you can see that the maximum height and maximum width have changed, because now this is your new combined compounded object. It's a weird concept, I know, but let's say I want to do it one more time with this eye. If I click once, it's just going to select the object in and of itself. Of course, that's useful because I'm going to want to reposition this object together. I don't want the space between these characters to change. So that's a useful piece of Illustrator's kind of ability to define all these different layers and the way that it isolates different layers. So if I were to click the eye and then double click it again, you'll see this bar does drop down one more time, but I can click that once, and you'll notice that it is isolated, and I can make changes to that on its own. Let's rotate it just for fun. Let's do it at 90 degrees. And so it's, I'm about done here, but I want to show you guys this because I think it should excite you, all of the different things you can discover within Illustrator about how it handles text. And I think in InDesign does a great job in helping you structure different kinds of text within a layout. And so I would recommend that maybe if you have this piece that you really like as your main text art or something like that, you can copy that over. It's an object. It will paste inside of InDesign. You just can't really make adjustments as easy. So sometimes this is a nice way of combining two programs. Use Illustrator to make adjustments to something like this, and then in InDesign, add other elements that might be easier in that program. So, yeah, I think Illustrator is pretty cool for this, and I recommend using that if you can. Of course, you guys should all know how to go out and get fonts, and so that should just open up so many doors with what you can do. So, Illustrator is the best at sort of allowing you to make custom adjustments to font, especially after you've typed it, because I can go on for days, but I think it's pretty neat. Anyway, that's all I want to show you for tutorials. Finally, let's talk about the assignment itself. So we looked at some of these pieces, and we noticed that the main idea of these is that the central piece of art within the design itself is the work being done with the font and the text and the creativity therein. So, obviously messaging and the words itself are important, because the content is an important part of an ad. I know we're not all typically inclined to be writers, but maybe some of you would like to exercise some of that creativity too. And this is a nice place to do that. If you're not as comfortable with finding your own or coming up with your own content or words for the piece, you can go out there and look around for ideas. Please don't copy an ad's copy word for word. Go and get pieces and stuff from articles or, websites if you want to, but please bring every creative element into this and structure them in your own way. So here's the assignment. Using whatever program you prefer, and I've given you guys my recommendation for how to use each of these, but by now I think you've all come up with your preferred method. You'll be creating your first ad of the semester. It's weird to me that we haven't actually done an advertisement yet. At least I don't think we have. But I think sometimes you can get, too much into the ad game. So there is more to graphic design than just ads. And my goal is to help show you guys that. But we are going to create our own. And the objective is as follows. Set up a letter-sized 8.5 by 11 sheet. It can be that, or it can be 11 by 17. Doesn't matter to me. But one of those two sizes, and make sure that it's vertical. Okay? So in the vertical format. Next, choose a company. I'd like it to be a real company. Let's not come up with our own at this point. Let's actually pick something that's out there. Maybe it's something that's unique to you that you know. Maybe it's well known. Doesn't matter too much to me. But let's choose a company or organization or nonprofit that exists. And it's up to you to come up with the idea, the purpose, the design, the content. Everything in this project is yours. And I think that's kind of an exciting thing. So basically, I don't want to overstate it, but you're going to be creating your own one-page advertisement, one of those two sizes, choosing your own company, what you want to do, and it's up to you what you want it to be. That being said, the most important part of this to me is how you work with the font and make that the most important visual element of the entire ad. So you can bring in pictures, you can bring in colors, and in fact, I recommend, of course, using a lot of color and being very, very vivid. And obviously, if it doesn't fit your brand, then don't. But take advantage of the opportunity to use a lot of color, to use images or whatever you want to do, and create an ad that you love that gets the message across with the purpose you intend. But the purpose that I'm intending for this project is that we use typography and everything in a very, very meaningful and visually impactful way. And I'm anxious to see what you guys come up with. This is the main thing. So how to utilize font to create the artwork? That's your task. So one extra thing that I have to mention before I wrap this up is that this is going to be slightly different in timing. Friday, April 3rd is when the first draft will be due. I'm going to get you guys on a little quicker timeline with this one. I want to see what you guys can do in that timeline. Then, after getting those, we'll do a video critique, or I might do a partner critique. I'm trying to think of ways we can kind of do that differently. And then we'll do a final draft, make those edits that are, may have been suggested, or you can ignore them too. And then Sunday night, as is usual, that's when the final will be turned in. So that's the idea here. And if you guys have any questions or need more tutorials or more explanation about those kind of impromptu tutorials I threw in there, let me know. I'll be happy to expand them for you. But I think all of you guys are very talented and very well-versed in the Adobe software. And, of course, you each know how to go out there and find solutions to those questions as well. Okay, that's all from me. I appreciate you guys, and I look forward to seeing what you guys turn in for Friday. At that point, you'll hear something from me, and we'll move from there. All right, take care, guys.